Okay. So I'm not privy to the details of what is being proposed, so I'll just make a couple of comments. First of all, I think here I'm speaking as European citizen. We shouldn't be afraid of saying Europe is taking leadership in tackling climate change. Okay, and we should be proud of this. And it's going back to values, first principles, and we want, we all know that Europe alone cannot deal with the climate change problem, and it's absolutely would be disastrous if, as a result of what we're doing in Europe, suddenly there's more coal-powered plants, more pollution happening elsewhere. We should absolutely, and we should engage what I call setting the green standard, make it absolutely non-negotiable. This is what we believe in, and stick to it, no matter what. Like we stick in other arenas for our values, human rights, etc. But it should be, first of all, very simple solution, hopefully, easy to understand, and that it's applied fairly consistently across the board. And I know that's easier said than done in trade matters. And I think that's why it's taken a while to figure this out. But I think I heard some solutions which I like. I like the solution where you measure the carbon content of each product and you declare it transparently. And I like the proposal that you use track and trace technology, distributed ledger technology, where you can trace the origin. And we discussed, I think, during our first meeting, for instance, in Chinese solar panels. We know that currently the producers in China have a big advantage with European manufacturers because they have cheap electricity, which comes from coal-powered plants. So I think that has to be clearly declared and ultimately taxed. We need to aim for a level playing field. But of course, the risk here is if we introduce a very complex system, lots of caveats, lots of unclear criteria which keep changes, inevitably our trade partners will say that this is Europe engaging essentially in protectionism, just dressed up as green policy.
Okay, on that note, I think I agree with most of the colleagues have said, but let me start off with ETS. And at least from an industry perspective, we know that the minus 55% for 2030 will lead to halving of the current cap by the end of this decade. That's a minus 61 to 63% for the ETS sectors. And industry will have to carry a significantly larger load of that. That's fair enough. And that's also the reason why we're investing so heavily to reduce our emissions through process technologies. But what this means is that we do welcome very much the focus on carbon leakage as a result of this higher climate ambition. That's a really positive and great sign. The problem is, how do you address this carbon leakage? Is it through an optimization of the EU ETS and the upcoming reform, or is it through this alternative CBAM measure? And yes, there's a lot of momentum, both political but from different industries. From our perspective, we are quite vigilant. And we really believe that some aspects need to be carefully resolved, analyzed and resolved for the chemical sector from our side. And what this means is chemicals is 1/3 of exports, European exports. How is this aspect addressed? And this is still very much an open question. And perhaps it will be an unresolved question, but it's a critical question for our sectors. And how will this be made compatible with rebates? Will there be a rebate system? Will that be WTO compliant? How are long complex value chains assessed? Chemicals is not one product. It's a value chain or even a value network in some cases. So where you place the levy can have a huge impact down the value chain for other sectors. So you might have leakage for downstream sectors. And then not least, we see the challenge of calculating and verifying this carbon footprint. And there was a question in the chat on, okay, how do we make sure there's no gamification or the declaration of green towards certain products to just circumvent the rules? That is also a worry that we have, this claiming and this gamification aspect, and how do we avoid that we have or prevent that we have this? And second, what type of bureaucratic system will be made available to verify all of this? And so there's a lot of issues and challenges we see that need to be resolved. And certainly when it comes to large trading partners in the chemical sector, there is a concern. But as Arthur pointed out, it may well be the Commission considers in its pilot phase a lean set of sectors with a lean proposal where these risks are less imminent. But then what I ask is, what is the compatibility between the CBAM as a carbon leakage protection measure and the EU ETS free allocation? And how will that compatibility work? And how will the two interact and affect those sectors that stay within the ETS?
I'm not sure whether both elements are compatible. I think we need to go for either or. But the WTO at the moment is not up to it. The WTO is overcame one of the biggest crises they had. And I think they need, and Paulius made it crystal clear, they need to also look at the carbon content, I would say, as the new currency. Carbon content is the new currency, and the WTO does not, in this multilateral agreements, look into this. That's why there is a lot of resistance and hesitance now towards these multilaterals, and there will be more and more bilaterals. Now, how can we do a fair implementation? Shraddha just put the finger into the wound, if you wish. I think a certification scheme that avoids the greenwashing that was mentioned in the chat can do the job. Again, Paulius mentioned distributed ledger technologies, so blockchain, for example, as one tool to help to keep, we always say the 5 T's. You need to keep these certificates or the guarantees of origin that should say the carbon content, but later on also a life cycle analysis, a little bit more than just carbon. We talked about critical material, but with 5 T's, you can make this a fair tool. One is traceability, trackability, then also the tradability of these guarantees of origin, the absolute transparency via the distributed ledger technologies, and a trustworthiness. It needs to be trustworthy, otherwise it wouldn't be accepted. But with these 5 T's, it would work on a global scale. Europe has the chance to move ahead, to propose something, to put something on the table. We see that other geographies like the US, also like the Chinese, would follow, but we need to come up with this 5 T principle. Thank you.
I would just like to add one more thing on this whole free allocation and this debate on carbon leakage. The faster we move towards CO2 free manufacturing, and the faster we move towards getting our industrial base decarbonized or drastically reduce emissions, the less of an issue carbon leakage and CO2 free allocation and all of that becomes. And I think this can be balanced by doing more on the other side. When we have our demand and supply side measures going hand in hand, we don't have to continue to give free allocation, worry about the lack of revenues and try to generate them from another instrument. And I really think the progress, if we go faster and discuss the how can we transform ourselves faster, instead of constantly focusing on this debate of which measures can we adopt to patch this up for today.
Thank you, Shraddha. We're coming to the end of the debate. I would have one last question, and I would like to end with a vision of a better tomorrow. So let us zoom out again to the big picture. And Jorgo, I would like to have your view here. What needs to change on a macro level in order to make it work? Do we need to rethink our economic system?
That's a big word, a big question. I give you a big answer. In very short, yes, we need to change the economic system, and common good will play a much bigger role than just profit. Pandemic was an example. Would we have a common good approach, we might be faster in vaccines. That's an opinion that I would like to put here, maybe as my final word. Thank you.
Okay, you mentioned also something about the donut economy, which I thought was an interesting point.
Yes, that's not, I didn't invent it. It's Mrs. Raworth. It's for me an economist that will be the Adam Smith of the future, and it's a female Adam Smith. She's a professor in Oxford, and you can Google it up. The donut economy. It's very simple. Everybody has an entitlement to use, so to say, the planet, the Earth, to have an impact. But it's limited. And the donut describes the inner circle. This is the minimum that we need to do against the Earth, against the planet, and the outer circle, which is the maximum we can do. And you are entitled to move in between. If you need more, if you have to fly 50 times per year, you need to buy the entitlements of other people who are not doing it. I just described it with people. You can transfer it also to other players like companies, and that would guarantee that we stay in the limits of what we can do against the planet, but we have a flexibility. Not everybody is forbidden to eat meat or to fly. He just needs to buy the entitlement by somebody who doesn't need it. Very, very nice principle. It allows a lot of market and it has a lot of ethics. Mrs. Raworth, the donut economy. Excellent.
We will definitely check it out. Thank you, Jorgo, for that input. Arthur and Michael, maybe on to be more specific, could maybe more private-public partnerships with tech platforms, for example, induce the behavioral change we need on a citizen and corporate level to back the EU's green ambitions bottom up? Or, I mean, what is your vision for a better tomorrow? How do you think these measures could be better adopted?
I think that kind of what we will need is a mix of measures. Sometimes in the discussion, one gets the impression that it's playing one against the other. Kind of some talk about research and others say, no, it's not about research. But of course, it is about research. It is about regulatory approaches, is about private-public partnerships, and we need more of them. We need to make better use of our scarce public resources if we want to get through this transition. For the EU alone, we calculated that we need an additional 350 billion euros every year in terms of investment compared to what we invested during the last decade. And that before the backdrop of many of the financial coffers are being exhausted because of the pandemic. So I think we need to be clever and use whatever measure is required in order to get there. Whether it requires a complete change of our economic system, I'm probably still of the old school. I think that if we get the prices right, then the current economic system can work. And it will lead us to the outcomes maybe some people foresee in the donut economy, or I think other phrases have been coined and labels for that to come to a good outcome. Market forces and the market-led economy is very helpful in making sure that resources are being used efficiently as long as they are correctly priced. And I think that is the issue we are struggling with for many, many years, whether it is the raw materials, whether it is the carbon that goes to the atmosphere. These were not priced in for a long time, and therefore the economic system was taking us to the wrong solutions. But now the awareness is so big around the globe that this will have to change. So getting the carbon prices right, getting prices for raw materials right, having the incentives, and then many measures have been mentioned during these discussions, whether it's contract for difference, whether it's new financial and innovative financial solutions, whether it's the green investment. All these are bits and pieces of the larger mosaic that we have to put together in the coming decade. It's a complex vision. It's not complicated, but complex.
Thank you.
Yes, I fully agree with most of what has been said. I mean, the capitalist market economies have arguably been the most powerful development engine in the history of humankind. But whether we call it a donut economy or whether we just go back to Adam Smith, I mean, there will be some part of creative destruction a la Schumpeter, because some industries will have to destroy parts of their way of working and have to invent new ways of working. And I think the whole idea of the Green Deal of the European Union is to capitalize on what we have. Our single market in the EU is probably one of the most sophisticated. And if we can't make it work, nobody can make it work. I think that's quite clear. For example, at the moment, and Jorgo has alluded to this a lot, we really need to move to a circular economy, because less than 20%, if you look at different statistics, are recycled resources in our economy. That means 80% or more is thrown away or shipped out to be mined out in third countries and used there. We need to find a better way of using these materials in a secondary market, basically. And I think one of the most important things here is the consumer. I believe we need some kind of labeling of how much of the materials in each product are recycled. Like today, we have an energy label for household goods, for washing machines, for drying machines or whatever. And in the future, maybe in 10 years, we have also a label that says this smartphone has 80% of recycled material and it costs you 50 euros more. And this one has only 20% recycled material and it costs you 50 euros less. And this is, I'm making this up, it might be, because we don't have the secondary market for these materials at the moment, it might well be that the recycled material are so much cheaper then that it becomes cheaper to have higher percentage of recycled material. Overall, I'm confident, and I think here I'm also with Arthur and Jorgo. The capitalist market economies will survive, but they have to get the right incentives. And the commons, the tragedy of the commons is that it's not priced in. They have to be priced in, and then we can transform our economy in the long run. And I think we can be the example for other economies in the world. And if we collaborate on this, I think we're going to be fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Collaboration, and this actually gives me brings me to the next point, and I would like to address that question to Paulius and Schrader. What role do you think can big tech play with their market power in decoupling growth from greenhouse gases? And maybe a collaboration, which I think we already see a few of on the horizon, between RWE and Facebook, for example. Schrader, you mentioned that also last time.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to cooperation, I think strategic partnerships, whether that's on the R&D front to develop, for example, our hydrogen activities, which we're doing with Siemens, or whether it's our cracker that we're doing with other players, or investment in our offshore wind farm, these are going to become, I think, more and more common. And I don't think it's novelty per se, but I think it will become more necessary as we go along. But in terms of really what corporations can do, I think our responsibility lies in the innovation. That's where we can bring in, we can do things differently. That's what chemistry does. But I also think corporations need to take sort of this value to society approach. And we developed this together with a bunch of others, where we say, look, we need to calculate the monetary gains, not just in terms of the net financial gain, but redefine what net financial gain means. And that's how we identify, quantify, and demonstrate our economic, social, and environmental impact in terms of that euro value. And I think that's where corporations, besides our innovation possibilities, need to redefine economic terms and monetary terms, what this means. So I think that's going to be a strategic component of this as well.
Thank you. Paulius?
Thank you very much. It falls on me to say something in conclusion. I think I want to go back to, first of all, I love the donut economy metaphor. and I did read up a little bit on it. I think it's all about outer constraints that we need to create and live to the fullest, but don't go outside the constraints. I think one of these constraints has to be what I call equitable distribution of risk and opportunity. Sometimes people call it social inclusiveness. There's a lot. We forget at the other side of the coin. I mean, before the pandemic, the biggest issues was social inequality and concentration of capital. We have concentration of wealth, of capital, etc. And I think the biggest risk to this, I call it the green revolution, what's going on. It will fail if too much opportunity, too much capital, too much of the goodness, of the greenness goes to the few and too many people left outside. So I'll go, I think very, very important, I want to repeat myself, that it's inclusive. And I mean it's meaningfully inclusive, so that we get a chance to invest. We take also, we have to take our burden. We have to share the burden. We have to share the costs, and it has to permeate to every end user, to the community, and has to have a buy-in. And I know I got criticized earlier for saying it's state-led. I think it is state-led. It's not a bad thing. It is coming from the top, but the mandate is from the people. There is a green mandate. It comes from elections, or about to have an election in Germany. I think the Greens are going to do well. I think the Greens parties are going over. So people giving European politicians a mandate, but it's very important that there's a buy-in from each household, and there's lots we can do, whether it's through producing energy and solar on your rooftops, whether it's investing in green bonds. We just have to be really creative and push that hard, because if it doesn't happen, if it's seen that only few benefit, this will fail. Okay, and that brings me on to the big tech. Again, it's very simple what they can do. They can switch from the users of a lot of power. They can switch to renewables. So lead by example. They have a huge role in innovation. They're excellent in innovating, staying ahead of the game. They're excellent communicators. We know Elon Musk, he has a whole following. So they need to help also to explain these very difficult, sometimes technological ideas, why they make the planet better, to get rid of the fake news that's surrounding. There's still a lot of propaganda going on, right? And finally, incentivize. I think through, again, like I said, for the airlines, give consumers an option to collect green points. Give them incentives. If they choose, like Amazon, maybe you choose to have your package delivered by a high-speed electrical train rather than the airplane. You get points. There are little things, behavioral things, that these very large, very powerful technology companies can help achieve in everyday life, because it's only when we change the consumer behavior ultimately that this revolution, green revolution, will succeed.
Absolutely.
I would like to come back on just one point on this market for low carbon market in Europe, or CO2-free market, single market, if you will. I think this is going to be critical. Many companies already have, as part of their portfolio, a set of green premium products. The problem is it's not the mainstream. The moment CO2-free products become the mainstream market demanded products, that's where you get the ball rolling. And I think the challenge we see today is that we have an ambition gap that's here, but at the level of society, everybody has to be willing to bear some cost to get there. If we want to live in a CO2-free society, everybody's going to have to use their pennies to get there as part of everyday life. And that gap hasn't been closed yet. And that's the market business will provide for, and that's the market business will supply for as well.
So as a community, we need a behavioral change amongst us, how in the way we consume and in the way we spend our money.
I always show the example of my parents, certainly not green hippies, but very conservative voters in the south of Germany. They about 10 years ago saw that the incentive for installing some solar panels, not for electricity, but for just producing warm water on the roof was good. They got a good credit from the KfW. They've done it. So they've invested themselves with a credit in green warming of their house. And now it's paid off. Now this pays off for the environment. They use less oil to heat the hot water in the summer, in summer and in the winter sometimes as well. And it's just about the incentives. You need to give the right incentives, then there can be behavioral change. And I think this is something we have seen in Germany a lot, but this can be replicated everywhere else. And I mean, we wanted to be controversial, but we're not very controversial today, unfortunately, or fortunately. We all agree on the things that need to be done. I've just wanted to recommend to those viewers who are still very skeptical about what we can do about climate change, a very good new book of the German author Frank Schätzing with the interesting title, Was, wenn wir einfach die Welt retten? So what if we just rescue the planet? And he underlines that if we don't get this right, basically the costs to our civilization and our economies will be so high that the costs are unsustainable of global warming. And I, for one, am one to say we should not abandon our civilization as we have it. It has its very good aspects. And if we don't want in the future just to have future aliens come and just find a very much reduced amount of humans or just some lower level mammals who have survived a 5 or 6 degree warmed planet, then we just have to get this right and get this done. And this is the only chance I think we have. Thanks.
Thank you very much for these fascinating points and insights. I think we're coming to the end of the discussion. I would like to open the floor now for questions from the audience. If any, I think we answered most of the questions in the chat, but if anyone wants to come forward and address a question to one of the speakers, please raise your hand. Okay, Mark. Yes, please go ahead.
I have one question. I'm not an expert like you, but Mr. Chatzimarkakis or Dr. Runge-Metzger or Mr. Kunchinas, Tesla received 465 million loan from the US government more than 10 years ago, which was very helpful for them. And you three mentioned Trump, the Biden administration's recent efforts, China's targets, and that the EU has a front-runner status at the moment. Can one quantify in years how far the EU policies are ahead, let's say in terms of green energy efforts versus the ones in the US or Asia? Are we in Europe 2-3 years ahead? And can we see that in terms of support and grants for European companies in the green energy sector like Tesla received them from the US government more than 10 years ago?
Maybe I can answer this for the technology I know best. In fuel cells, we are not ahead. So fuel cells are a technology to use hydrogen to propel a car, a train. So we are not ahead. So they're definitely, Asia is ahead and Canada. And when it comes to electrolysis, splitting water into oxygen and hydrogen with renewable energy or with other, but with renewable, we are 6 months ahead. We were 2 years ahead some years ago, but we are too slow. We have also talks to Biden administration, and these talks show that the Trump years were lost years for the US, fine, but they catch up massively, and a lot of these production of manufacturing of these technologies has already gone to China. So we are too slow. I would say 6 months ahead, and that's my bet, my guess.
Okay.
I can pass a quick comment on the markets side. I think it's clear that Europe is leading, especially with taxonomy. I have to thank, we don't thank European Commission and the Parliament often enough, but here did a great job. on taxonomy and defining what green means. I also think that we're leading in green bond standards. There's a new green bond capital markets emerging in Europe. I think the central bank, European Central Bank, has been more vocal in lending its support. So finance sector, which normally USA is ahead, I think we have maybe 12-month advantage, but it's very, very easy to lose this leadership. We can't relax and be complacent. We need to keep racing if we want to be ahead.
Maybe from my end, I can add that if you look at the efficiency of the different economies around the world, what we have managed in Europe is to become probably the most efficient economy. We have even overtaken Japan over the last decade. When you look at in terms of energy efficiency, if you look at it in terms of carbon productivity. So overall, the benefit we have for the entire economy is that we have become much more efficient. Then you can take, like Jorgo was doing and also Paulius was doing, a much more granular view on different areas of the economy. And I think many talk here about also the Brussels effect, that many other economies around us are learning from Europe and pick up on it. And if you look at regulation, for instance, one of our very successful sales models was on energy efficiency. The energy labeling is something that has been taken up by China. It has been taken up by India. Of course, they have done their little modifications in order to fit it to their own economies. But in principle, they're using the same standards. And we see that also in the car industry. There's a very nice graph available where you look across the entire world in terms of which standards for engine efficiency have been picked up. And if you look back about 20 years ago, we were probably 15 years ahead as Europe. And in the meantime, other countries, Korea in particular, but also China, have picked up. So this advantage or advance we have has shrunk to about 5 years, but we are still ahead of the pack when it comes to car efficiency standards. So one word to unpack the question, go really into the details. And as a lot of people were talking about COVID, I think Europe played a major role in developing the vaccines and also producing the vaccines, which shows that, yes, we have strategic leadership in many areas. A last maybe aspect of this is that our companies, of course, adjust also to different parts of the world. I think the chemical industry is one good example. The biggest market of the chemical industry, or European chemical industry, is no longer Europe. It's probably Asia and the United States. And the same we see happening with the car industry. And China, of course, was taking steps forward when it comes to what they call the new energy vehicles, so particular electrification. And there's a number of European companies who were innovating on this particular aspect in China. A reverse example is General Electric, which is a US-based company, which has invested a lot in terms of research and technology development into wind technologies, but it has done so in Europe, not in the United States. It's only later started rolling out these technologies also in a big way in the US. So it's a very, again, complex picture when you talk about leadership. But in many areas, I would agree, we will have to speed up in Europe. And I think that's also one of the aims and objectives of the Green Deal of Europe. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for all your insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Burkhard von Kienitz, I see your hand is up. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you very much. It was really interesting, and it's always helpful if it's provocative, and not everyone saying the same. I was convinced when it comes to CBAM or carbon border adjustment mechanism on a first glance, because there seems to be no other chance to avoid carbon leakage. But and we heard a lot about transparency and tradability and legal aspects to avoid protectionism and other things. But what about the reality if I look at China and the amount of renewable energy they have there, beside all coal? If they want to export steel to Europe, it's easy to have real perfect and exact certificates, and you can trace everything, but they can flag the steel which comes to Europe as renewable, as green. And not only China, how to avoid this and how to cope with this, that there, if we only in Europe ask for carbon neutrality and carbon border adjustment, how to act with this?
Yeah, maybe I take a stab at that question to begin with. I think in part I referenced and alluded to this earlier. If we want to avoid being circumvented by large trading partners who do this gamification or reallocation of green certificates, on the one hand, you could argue, well, that's exactly what we want. We want everybody to be moving in that direction. But as a result, your own European industry may be less competitive. And so I answered the same question. We need to get Europe's industrial bases making low CO2 manufacturing faster than anything else. The best performing installations under the EU ETS should be CO2-free manufacturing installations tomorrow. And we need to get faster to that point so we avoid this circumvention. And until we have that, we won't be on par. And there will always be this differential, this delta difference that needs to be accommodated for as long as we want this European industrial base, which I believe we do. So I don't think it's an easy question, but I think all I can say is we need to speed up our activities to become less CO2 intensive.
If we talk specifically about steel, I think it is possible to monitor this, because in steel you cannot cheat. You need, if you replace coal in the steel production, there's one way to do it, using renewable electricity, electric arc, and the direct reduction of iron ore with renewable hydrogen. That's the way you do. And you need to prove, and you can prove, whether you change your blast furnace, the old style, into a DRI furnace. It's not a furnace anymore. And that's the first step. You can check, did they really do it? And if they didn't, it's not credible. So steel production then can work also with quota. That's one of the reasons why, if you ask me, wind turbines at the moment, they are very European, because they are so huge, they cannot be shipped and transported around the globe. They are very European. Let's start there. Let's take quota of renewable steel for the wind turbines, and we can start from there and tell the Chinese right away, if you don't reach that quota, and we will check and analyze it, we won't accept it. And CBAM is definitely one possibility to just put a price on it. It is possible.
Jürgen, what happens if they do indeed meet that green criteria, but the rest of the stuff they export is still coming from also fuel emitting, and that's exported to the rest of the world? You're not changing the net ball game.
So first of all, that's why I was talking about an LCA, so a global ecological footprint. Yeah. We are not there yet. We would be good if we get a CO2 footprint, a carbon footprint. Let's start with that. And I think even China becomes also serious about their own climate situation. But we need to ask for it. I see German industry, for instance, that I know best, and you represent it, Schroeder, is quite naive in just saying, no, retaliation is a problem. Keep markets open, don't do anything. It's wrong. We should set clear targets, and we should also conduct negotiations and make it high level. I mean, this whole evening, we are talking about a behavioral change. why not change the parameters also in our discussions on high level? We are talking a little bit about human rights now with China, a little bit, not openly, not clearly, but we should talk about this clearly because they also signed the Paris Agreement. And that's the best way to do it. I know it sounds difficult, but in the end, we need just to put it on our agenda. It's a new model, I know, but we need to go that way.
I'm not convinced, Jorgo. You haven't convinced me, but let's see.
Then let's meet and build up this model together. We need BASF, of course, and we have some plans. It's I cannot present all these plans now in 1 minute. I'm sure I will convince if I have more time.
Let's talk about it. Definitely, let's talk about it. But I'm at least positive and hopeful that the Commission is looking at a few sectors to begin with, and let's see how lean the proposals are.
Happy to do so.
Maybe from my end, I fully agree with Mr. von Kienitz that this is an issue, is very difficult to get around. Particularly if you think of a static world. And I think that's the point. We want this world to be dynamic. So we want to see China even using more renewable energy in their industrial processes in the coming years. And if China is serious with the targets it has set itself, then there is no way around. And I think what we see already today is and Mr. von Kienitz was alerting to that and pointing to this, is that there is a huge deployment of renewables happening in China at the same time as they are still building coal plants. And in a similar way, I think I would see that with the new infrastructure plan that the Biden administration is putting onto the table. So I think with that dynamic approach and the dynamics that are happening in the world, I'm hopeful that we might need CBAM for a while, even if it is dangling there as a threat in the air, in order to get the discussion into the right direction, kind of to really put it in place and make it practically working is going to be damn difficult, even if we restrain it to a few sectors. I think there's no doubt about it. If it would have been easy, I think the European Union would have done it in the year 2000 when the US was walking away from the Kyoto Protocol for the very first time. But it hasn't happened since. So it's quite a complex issue. And also the alternative routes that are being discussed are not simple. When Jorgo was talking about, yes, you can deploy ledger technology and look at the traceability. This is quite expensive in terms of monitoring every single bit and piece of our economy. Kind of for something that we want to completely get rid of in terms of emissions in our economy within the next 30 years. It's also the question, should we really invest so heavily on something that is going to go away and there's nothing to be monitored, hopefully, in those years that are there to come? Or should we make the practical approach, as Shraddha, I think, was arguing for? Let's move ahead and try to be ahead of the curve and try to be the first innovator and reap those benefits as a first mover.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. We have 7:38, so we run good over time. But I think I call it an evening for tonight. And I want to thank the audience and the speakers for a fascinating debate. And I hope to see you at one of our next events again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.